Are you looking for the best brush pen to add to your toolkit and use in your next drawing? In this video, I test out 8 different brush pens to find out which ones are the best and which ones aren't worth it. So to really test all of these brush pens, I'll create a thumbnail drawing with each one of them, and then I'll also do a pen test later so you can really see the difference in line weight and thickness as you apply various pressure. And I'll even do a little bit of lettering so you can really see what you can do with each one of these brush pens. So this video will give you a glimpse into all of that so you can really understand how each of these pens work. This first one I did with the Muji Brush Pen. This is a favorite brush pen of mine. I absolutely love it. So you can see you can get a variety of lines from it, from straight and thin to thicker if you press down more, and if you press down a lot, you can get a super thick line and then vary it again. So you can see you get a variety of lines from this pen. I also love to use it for lettering. This next brush is super interesting. It's a uni pen fine line extra fine brush. You can see it has a really thin brush tip. With a pen like this, you really need to be careful with how steady your hand is when you're creating your lines. Otherwise, they'll be pretty shaky, which can be okay if that's what you're looking for. So I created this sketch with this pen. And with barely any pressure, you can get really thin, precise lines. And then if you add more pressure, thicker. So pretty similar to the Muji as far as variation in line. This is also a new favorite brush pen of mine. I just really like the variation that you can create with it. And it's really great for lettering. Up next is this brush pen. I don't remember the exact name of it. I think it's a Pentel brush. And I've had a lot of these over the years. They can be a little messy, so you definitely want to be careful. But basically, the first time you purchase one, you'll have to release the ink into this barrel by pressing and holding, and you can see how it fills with ink. This one has a lot more bristles in the brush. And what I love about this brush pen is it has this messy look, as you can see from my sketch. There's a lot more texture in the line, and it just creates a nice texture when you're filling large areas. So similar to the first two brushes, you can also create a lot of variation in line with this one. Very thin, straight lines. And then with more pressure, you can get thicker lines and you can see a lot more texture, much darker. And then you can alternate between. I've been using this one for quite a while and I do really like it. The only thing that I'm not a fan of is, like I said, it can get messy. As you can see, it's already getting on my finger. So you just have to be careful that it doesn't transfer onto your paper too. And you can see when you're filling in, if you just kind of do it fast and sloppily, you can get these nice textures. And if you do it to the side of the brush, you can also get different texture. You can see how it looks more like a dry brush here, thicker over here when you're more upright with it. But if you play with the angle, you can create some interesting textures. And this one's also great for lettering as well. So if you're looking to create interesting textures for a large area of a section, this is a good one because you can get a lot of variation when you tilt the brush. Next is the Pentel Brush Sign Pen Artist. This is another really interesting brush pen. Similar to the Uni Pen, it has a really small, thin brush tip. So it's another one where you have to be very careful with how steady you are with your hand. Pretty similar. You can get lots of thin lines. You just have to be really steady. And then thicker with more pressure. So far the first 4 pens work pretty much the same way. You're going to get similar results no matter which one you're using. It just comes down to preference of maybe the way that one feels in your hand versus the other. Or like I said, with this one, it's a little bit more messy because you have to squeeze the ink into the barrel. And these other ones, you don't have to do that. So that is a plus. But this is another really great one. I also love to use this one for lettering. You can tilt this one to the side, but you don't get quite as much texture as this one. When the ink runs low on this pen, you'll get these dry textures, but just because of the way that these pens work, that doesn't happen quite as often. But if you're looking to cover more area quicker, then you could tilt it on the side. So this brush pen is very new to me. It's Japanese. It's got a pretty small brush tip, but it creates very bold lines. So for this test drawing, I drew an object, something more graphic, to really lean into how bold and thick this brush pen is. So you can get even thicker variation in this one. You will notice that some have different shades of black to them. Like the Uni Pen is a little bit lighter. This one is a lot lighter, but this one is pretty dark. This pen feels a little more slick just because of the design of it. So not a big deal, but just something I noticed. As I said with the first few pens, pretty much operates the same. When you're trying to find your favorite brush pen, you'll definitely want to just try out a lot of different types of brush pens because it's really hard to gauge which one will be your favorite, just the way that one might feel better in your hand versus others, or one just creates much smoother strokes for you. You will really only know that if you test a lot of pens. Next, I tested the Sakura Pigma brush pen. This pen I've had for a long time, so you can see it definitely has a lot of wear and tear on it. So with these pens, you will probably go through a lot more of them, unless you're just really good at taking care of your brush pens. But you'll notice that that sort of gives your drawing a little bit of charm. I actually don't mind having really worn brush pens because you can create some interesting textures and drawings with it. Like here with the petals, you can see how some of the bristles on the brush pen splay out, and they just create these interesting textures that you wouldn't be able to get any other way without using this pen for a really long time. So sometimes your pens can get better with age. But of course, if you're not a fan of that, then you'll just need to continually go through new pens. As far as creating thick and thins, you can do the same here. You can't get quite as thick as some of the other brush pens. There is a little bit of a limit, so that might be about the thickest that you can make this pen go. And when you do that, it almost looks more like a marker tip. If you like Tombow marker brush pens, then you might like the way that this one works because it operates pretty much in the same way. But you can still get thin lines. Pretty good control. As you can see with all of these little textures, this is what I mean by what happens when you have an older brush pen. I think it adds character, but if you want a more precise brush stroke, then you would want to use a newer pen or an entirely different one. And so because of the interesting textures in this one, I used it to create a more simple, bold, graphic type of drawing because I feel like it suits that type of pen more. This one I'm not as much of a fan of for using for lettering just because it's a lot harder for me to get thick and thins when I'm doing handwriting. But you can see there's some nice textures here. For this drawing, I use the Faber-Castell Pitt Artist Pen, black 199. I'm not sure if there are different shades of black because out of all of the tests, this one definitely doesn't have the richest black. It's a lot more gray. Now, of course, if you're to layer it, it does get darker, but if you're just doing one layer, it's going to look like this, pretty gray. So this is probably my least favorite brush pen, and if anything, I feel like it operates more like a marker, very similar to Tombow brush markers, just with the way that the layering works. And you can get thin lines, but not quite as thin as some of the other brush pens. It just doesn't have as sharp of a tip at the top. It does have a limit to how thick it gets, and it does feel more like a marker versus a brush pen. And I'm also not a fan of using this one for lettering just because there isn't enough variation. To me, it just looks like a regular marker. But if you're doing drawings where you don't need a lot of variation in the line, this could be a good option. I do have other colors from this same brand, and I like using them for drawings, but I just don't like the black one quite as much. And the last one I'm testing here is a Zebra brush pen. Compared to all the other brush pens, this one definitely has a different type of tip to it. So just for comparison's sake, the Muji Brush Pen on the left and the Zebra one on the right, you can see that it's more of a rounded tip versus a sharp pointed tip. So you can guess pretty much like the last two pens, it's going to operate in a similar way. To me, it's more of a pen or a marker. It's great for creating these bold drawings here. It's not what I would want in a brush pen. If you are very light with the touch, you can get thin lines. And my guess is that the more that you use this pen, the less sharp it will be. And so likely you won't be able to create quite as many thin lines. And there's also a limit to this one. Even when you're pressing forcefully down, this is about as thick as you can get it. And you can see there's not too much of a variation. It's very slight. You really have to put a lot of pressure to get that variation. So if you're someone that is pretty rough with the pressure of your pens, then this might be a good one for you because you'll really have to press down to create thicker strokes. While this isn't my favorite brush pen because it doesn't have quite as much variation as some of the other ones, like this one, for example, but it is really good for drawings. Now to rank these pens from favorite to least favorite, I personally would put the Muji Brush Pen in the #1 spot just for the versatility. It's really easy to use, it's comfortable, you can create a lot of line variation, nice drawings, and lettering. It's definitely in the #1 spot for me. #2, I would put the Pentel Brush Pen just because it's a classic, and remember, you can create a lot of really interesting textures with it. Next up is the Uni Pen Extra Fine Brush for the super thin lines that it creates. Really interesting. I love it for lettering. Following close behind would be the Pentel Brush Sign Pen Artist. Very similar, but I just happen to like this one a tiny bit more. And in the #5 spot, this Japanese Sai Brush Pen for the bold lines it creates. And then in my bottom 3 for brush pens would be the Zebra Brush Pen. It's great for line drawing, but not for what I'm looking for in a brush pen. Then the Sakura Figma Brush Pen, and in last place, the Faber-Castell Pitt Brush Pen. Just because to me, these seem more like markers, like they don't have a lot of variation in thick and thin lines. But after reviewing all of the test drawings, you should be able to have a better idea of which brush pen serves your need. One brush pen doesn't solve everything, but I definitely recommend trying them out for yourself, seeing what you like, and you may realize that you want a few different brush pens to create different types of line art in your drawings. Hopefully this video was helpful in you finding the right brush pen. Out of all the brush pens I tested, which one was your favorite? Or do you have a favorite that I didn't show? Let me know in a comment below. And if you're looking for more art-related or sketchbook videos, check out one of these next.